How do you prevent self-sabotage? Decent question. If you have any questions, jump in the comments and let me know. I think it comes down to two basic things. First of all, you have to know what your insecurities are. As I talked about in the newsletter this morning at joindamon.me, it's almost like knowing what your Achilles heel is. And the second part is having strategies in mind around that Achilles heel, around that insecurity. I was talking to a relative recently, and they were talking about they wanted to start a project, and they tend to make it big. So it's like, okay, I'm going to do this small thing. Well, why don't I add this into it? Well, why don't I make it bigger? Well, if I'm going to do that, I might as well make it bigger. And you can almost see it expanding. But at the same time, that idea is expanding, which works for some people. I can be like that. So I tend to be expansive. So that works. But while my loved one was doing this, I could also see the fear start to come in their eyes as far as, wait, how am I going to do this? But it was like they kept expanding. It's like, and in many cases, if we have that particular type of framework, then we're just not going to start, right? It's almost like, okay, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make a Lego model. You tell them to play with Legos, except for with my kids. I'm going to do a Lego model of, let's say, a building. I'm just going to do a building. Wait, well, why don't I make a building next door? Why don't I make the people that are walking to the buildings? Well, why don't I make a neighborhood? Why don't I make a city? Why don't I make a replica of Las Vegas? And that excitement is there, and it's like, okay, but I haven't put down one brick. I don't even have enough bricks. That's too much. Let me move on to the next thing. That is a self-sabotage. Because there's a certain Achilles heel and insecurity where it's like, if I do something small, essentially, that's not going to be enough. What I do has to be big. Otherwise, people aren't going to appreciate it. I won't feel good about it. So let me make it as big as possible. Oh, but I don't have the follow through to actually do this big thing. And if I can't do this big thing, I'm not going to do it at all. Example from me, I told you I was going to bring out some of my dirty laundry, was me being a kid, and my kids are 8 and 10. Around that same age, particularly around the age of my eldest. And my room was so messy. Looking back decades later, I'm like, oh my God, how did I sleep? You know, I mean, we were in a safe neighborhood. There weren't any issues in the house, but something could have been hanging out in my room the whole time and just crawled out at night, and it would have been fine. For someone who has an active imagination, I don't know how I managed to have papers and whatever other stuff that I had on the floor and still sleep very well at night. Of course, my parents were like, Damon, you got to clean your room, get your stuff together. But I'm very self-motivated, which is a gift and a curse. I'm assuming a lot of y'all are too, since a lot of us are entrepreneurs, right? It's kind of the nature of self-motivation. F you, I'm not going to do what you tell me. Shout out to Suicidal Tendencies, the group, right? But that whole thing, it's like, I wasn't having it, but I was comfortable with that. But what I learned later is that for high achievers, I had a TV show, I got best-selling books. I'm sitting here sweating 110 degree heat. It keeps going up, right? I'm sweating in 110 degree heat in a blazer because I want to show up for y'all. Tell me I'm not an overachiever. For overachievers like us, right? They're not like us, right? Overachievers like us, we're more likely to have that extreme mindset, which I'll get into a little bit later on in the show. Stay tuned for that. And so it's like the room is so messy, I'm not going to do it at all. Because I know it's going to get messy again. The daily chores and all that, I don't want to do that. Because I already ate 3 times today. I have to do the same thing over again tomorrow. Yeah, I already made a mess in my room. I gotta clean it now? But it's gonna get messy again, so why not just skip that? It's almost like you're too smart. It's like, skip that, right? Too smart in air quotes, trust me on that. So there had to be ways for me to structure things where, my office is a little bit messy, but not anywhere near what it was. And absolutely messy because I'm doing a lot of things. And like I mentioned in previous episodes, I'm doing a lot of projects. So this is actually not the default. My default is having a clean office. But the cleanliness comes in me doing little things at once. Saying, okay, I'm going to have a snack in here, which I rarely do in the office, but I'm going to make sure I throw it away. I have my coffee. Okay, let me make sure I clean my coffee mug and move on. and do that while it's happening. That allows the self-sabotage to at least be, contained. As I said in the earlier analogy, you can't stop self-sabotage. We're naturally insecure. We naturally have our Achilles heel. We naturally have our issues. In some ways, as some psychologists said it, I forgot who said it, I wish I could remember, but they said our issues are essentially our personality. Those things we call personality are actually based on our issues, and if you want to get really deep, also based on our trauma and whatever came from that. Whole another episode that we actually had earlier this year. And in fact, if you go to the previous episode I just talked about, as far as, let me find the link for you guys. You know what I'm talking about if you just joined in. Here we go. How to know yourself better, beginner's guide. I talk about this. The link is right below, just to make sure I didn't neglect you guys who just got into the show. So if you know what your Achilles heel are, knowing yourself, then you're able to create strategies to get around that. That's the key thing. You're not going to stop your issues. There's always so much healing from, trauma healing, whatever you want to call it, you can do. Because some are scars, which are past tense, and some are wounds where they're always going to be a little bit open for you. It's just going to be insecurity. That's part of humanity. And trust me on this one, I've worked really hard working on my stuff, particularly again, as of the last several months or last couple of years, even deeper than I normally do. And those things are still there. So you find ways to work around them or even make peace with them. I'm insecure about certain things. I've talked about it in my books. That's kind of what it is. But that humanity allows me to connect with you and vice versa. And then we might even come up with strategies that allow us to overperform. One other quick example, I talk about this. It's definitely in the Complete Bring Your Worth collection. I can't remember which book. I want to say it's in The Ultimate Bites as Entrepreneur. You might be able to tell I have a slight lisp. And I had a really strong lisp. Like, people weren't able to understand me back when I was starting kindergarten. So really high reading capacity or communication level. It's probably like 4th or 5th grade communication level while I was going into kindergarten, 1st grade. So I was always really into communication. Other things, strengths weren't as high. So this isn't a flex. I was just saying I was overperforming in communication. So you can imagine how hard it was when people couldn't understand what I was saying because I had such a bad lisp. Fast forward now, and I've done 27 books. I've been on various TED stages. I got the show. There's 18,000 plus subscribers as of this premiere. And I'm about to hit 400 episodes. And I have 2 degrees in journalism. Shout out to Northwestern and Oakland University. So that's what I mean. Like, that insecurity, those challenges as far as saying people don't understand what I'm saying. I overperformed in that in such a ridiculous way where it's like, people are like, oh, you're a great communicator. And I'm all like, am I? Because that insecurity is still there. That's what I mean. If I didn't take that and understand that communication was an Achilles heel of mine and recognize that I felt insecure about it, then there wouldn't be anything I could do about it. If I was just like big and bold and I'm like, I communicate fine, blah, 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 and I felt that way all the time, you can imagine the self-sabotage that would have stopped me from getting my master's in magazine publishing, would have sure as hell wouldn't have got me on the TED stage. Like, all that stuff wouldn't have happened, I don't think. Or I would have sabotaged it before it would have happened. So that's what I mean by being able to prevent it. It's not about being able to take it away or suddenly feel better. It's not going to go away. It's more like, I'm going to find ways to recognize it, know my insecurities are, and then to come up with strategies to process and deal with it so that I can, at baseline, be functional in my life. Otherwise, the sabotaging does not stop because you haven't healed, recognize what you need to heal from. Speaking of strategy, why plans don't work, do this instead. It's actually one of my favorite episodes. It's one of the less watched episodes. And it's like that little episode that could, where I'm like, oh my gosh, I love this episode. I love the theory behind it. It's basically the difference between a plan and a strategy. I'm not even gonna get into it here. It's a super short episode, like 6 minutes long. Check it out, please. Please do me a favor, check it out. But it gets into this where the short version of it is that a plan is temporary and fixed. And the strategy is more flexible and allows you to have long-term thinking, which is what we're really getting at here. Speaking of that, man, I'm hitting all my favorite books today. Upstream by Dan Heath. Shout out to Dan. Fantastic book. I have the audiobook, but I don't have the physical book. I need to buy the physical book, so I need to grab it. Maybe I'll put it on my Father's Day list. But fantastic book. The basic premise is that there's downstream and there's upstream, like a river. You know how a river goes. There's going up the river and there's going down the river. What you want to do is look upstream at issues that might be coming up, so that when they hit the downstream to where you are, they're not an issue anymore. So many, similar to Gay Hendricks' book, The Big Leap, there's so many good theories in this, like a ridiculous amount of good theories. One of my favorite ones, I forget the name of the theory. Lots of theory terms in there. I forget the name of the theory, but the basic idea is that we often think we're doing well when we're able to do well in a crisis. We'll put it like that. It's like, oh, this thing happened and I was able to show up here. And this thing happened, I was able to show up here. What we undervalue, though, is making decisions that prevents the crisis from happening at all. And the problem is that when you prevent something from happening, mentally you don't get credit for it. And no one else gives you credit for it either. Right? So if something like the printer suddenly catches on fire at your office job and you're able to put the fire out, they're gonna be like, Jim, and then they're gonna give you a crown and parade you around and say, you saved our company. But if 3 months before you were Bob and you notice that the printer had some type of logistical issue with it and it might cause a fire, you could fix it without getting paid, run by your boss and say, hey, looked like there might be a future issue with the printer, so I just went in and fixed it. They'd be like, all right, thank you, Bob. And then they go back to drinking their coffee or doing their reports or whatever. Total stereotypes here. I'm thinking Office Space or The Office, pick one. Do you see the difference? Upstream is basically saying, you want to be like Bob. You want to just stop it before it even becomes an issue. But we have to train our brains for that. One of the biggest trainings about it is that you're not going to get as much credit for it. There's things that I've done within my family. There's things I've done within my businesses. There's things that I've done as a coach where I saw stuff down the line and I'm like, okay, we're going to change this. And might not even have said anything. If you're going to do that, which I think is true leadership, if you're going to do that, just assume you're not going to get credit for it. In fact, there was an excellent book, and I cannot remember which book it was, but it began with a great analogy, talking about a medicine person. And this is back in the day, it might have been like the Andes or somewhere like that, but ages ago. And a medicine person, to paraphrase briefly, what wasn't well known. And I think someone came up and said, hey, you do all this great work. Why aren't you well known? Why aren't they praising you? And the medicine person said, well, if they were praising me, then it would have been too late. They're going to praise when they're sick already. They're going to praise when there's a crisis. When they actually see the magnitude of the situation and then I'm able to fix it, they're going to praise it. But I do good work because I'm able to stop it before it even begins. So that's what upstream is. As soon as I find that book, I definitely will include it in one of the episodes. I wish I could remember what book it is. Like I said, I've read a ridiculous amount of books. It was a great analogy that began the book. Upstream is basically giving you the tools to be that medicine person, to say, hey, this is how I'm going to go ahead and show up in my life, in my business, to my colleagues, to the world. I'm going to do this in this particular way, and that will prevent these bigger things from happening. Again, back to the self-sabotage. Love that book. Highly recommend it. Can't recommend it more. Shout out to Dan. You made a killer book. I'm entrepreneurial coach Damon Brown. I'm here to help you as a side hustler or solopreneur, otherwise a non-traditional entrepreneur. You're watching Bring Your Worst Show. You subscribe for free at the link below. I come to you every Wednesday at 1:11 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, Vegas time. Like I said, it's hot as Alvin over here. Welcome to June in Las Vegas. All right. If you have any questions or comments, throw them in the chat. Are there moments where you are about to self-sabotage and you're able to prevent it? Jump in there, share some stuff.